In this video, we'll be comparing the computer adaptive tests against the computer-based tests. So there's a very subtle difference between these two testing types, and you will keep on seeing these kind of terms throughout your test taking season. So it's better for you to know which one is which and which one will benefit you more, right? So that's what we'll be looking at in this particular bit. So in terms of the computer-based tests, most of the tests will be conducted in this pattern, which essentially means that even if you would have appeared in a paper pen based format, you would have got the same experience. The only bit is, instead of solving questions on paper and looking at questions on a piece of paper, you are looking at those questions on a computer. That's the only difference between a paper based test and a computer based test. Now, in terms of what happens in a particular slot, you will have the same set of questions in the same slot if there are two of you who are taking the test in the same slot, right? So you'll have the same set of questions. What might happen is the order of questions or the options might be jumbled in most situations, and that's why no two people will have the same, or no two adjacent people will have the same way in which the questions have been asked to you. But then again, if you look at the overall picture, the same questions would have been asked to any two people who would have appeared for a computer-based test in a particular slot. Now, in terms of what happens in terms of the different slots in which these tests are conducted, right? So let's say, for example, you are taking the test on the 10th of a particular month, and your friend is taking the test on the 11th of a particular month. Then how do you figure out which one had the better experience, or how do you make it fairer? So for that, we have this process called normalization. Now, of course, that has been covered in a separate video as to what exactly is normalization and how is it carried out. But for the sake of convenience, what happens when it comes to normalization is that both the slots are made normal, or both the slots are brought to parity in terms of the level of difficulty. So let's say, for example, you appeared in a slot which was seemingly difficult, but a friend appeared in a slot which was seemingly on the easier side. Your friend would have scored better in terms of the raw score that they would have got, right? But because you have attempted and got some score in a difficult slot, on the basis of the performance of the entire slot, it will be decided whether a slot is difficult or easier compared to another slot, and if yes, then how do they bring those two slots to parity, right? So that is done using statistical tools, and at the end of it, all the slots in which people would have appeared for the test would be normalized and they would be brought to the same level. In terms of the level of difficulty of a particular slot, now this entire normalization process is carried out after the test is done. And that's why the LOD of a particular slot is judged after the test on the basis of the performance of the people who would have appeared for the test in that particular slot. So that is basically what happens after the test is done. So during the test, it might be a scenario wherein you might find questions to be difficult, but then again, your performance has to be relative and not absolute. So your performance is also dependent on the performance of the other people in that particular slot. Now, this performance will be based on the relative strength of the takers, right? So if, let's say, for example, the people who are appearing in a particular slot are particularly not well prepared, then you might have an advantage if you are a part of that same slot, because you will be well prepared for the test. But again, this is all a theoretical bit of discussion that we are having here, purely because what happens is, because you have a significant sample size. So most of the tests will be taken by more than 1 lakh or 2 lakh individuals, and with that statistically significant sample size, it will be more or less assumed that the split of the aptitude of the test takers is uniform across the various slots, and that's why it should not matter if there are a few people who are exceptionally good or exceptionally poor who are taking a particular slot, right? So at the end of the day, the entire thing makes a lot of sense. Now, in this particular context, what is going to happen is, because all of you are being given the same test, your performance might be dependent on the kind of day that you are having. So let's say, for example, you are someone who does not enjoy a lot of set theory based questions, and there is a slot wherein there are 10 set theory based questions, let's say. Then you will be in big trouble, because your weakness has been exposed. And because other people are going to take the same questions, it is completely your weakness against other person's strength, right? And that's basically going to create a problem in terms of the performance. It might be dependent on the kind of day that you are having, or the kind of question types that appear at the particular test. So some people might feel that this is not fair because they had prepared for 90% of the syllabus and the questions came from the remaining 10% of the syllabus. But then again, the tables could have turned on any other day. So all said and done, it is not really something that you can hide behind, right? So computer-based test, again, it's a fixed format. Everybody who will be appearing in a particular slot will have the same set of questions, and that's what makes it slightly fairer. But then again, if those questions are not from your areas of strength, then you might think of it as an unfair proposition. Now, when it comes to computer adaptive tests, as the name suggests, the computer or the system will adapt to your level of aptitude and will keep on making questions difficult or easier compared to your previous question. And that is completely dependent on your response to the previous questions. So let's say, for example, you are being graded on a scale of 0 to 100. Now, what will happen is the first question that the system asks you is going to be of level 50, let's say, for example. Now, if you answer that question correctly, the system will want to test you with a more difficult question. So it will test you with a 60 level question. Let's say you answer that correctly as well. It will throw a question which is, let's say, at level 75 towards you. Let's say you answer that question correctly as well. Then it will give you a 90 level question. Now, let's say you get it wrong. Now the system knows that you have scored more than 75 but less than 90. Now it will try to figure out where between 75 and 90 do you lie. So then the system will try to give you a question which is of level 85. If you answer it incorrectly, you will get a question which is of level 80, let's say, for example. If you answer that question correctly, then you might get a question which is of level 83, and so on. So the system will keep on oscillating between two numbers and will try to figure out where is it that you lie at the end of the entire section, right? So that is basically what you mean by computer adaptive tests, wherein the test will adapt to your skill and will tell you the level at which your skill lies at the end of your section. Now, typically what happens in this kind of test is that every person who is going to appear for the test will see a different paper theoretically. Purely because what happens is, based on your response to the first question, you will get your second question. There is a big pool of questions from where questions are selected to match the levels that the system is throwing at you, right? And that's basically something which will make the test different for different candidates who might be taking it in the same slot as well. So let's say you and your friend are both appearing for the test at 10 a.m. on a particular day. There might be a very good chance that you and your friend might have seen completely different set of questions. And that's what makes it slightly different compared to computer-based tests. Now, the LOD of the questions is set before the test, meaning that they will know which question corresponds to a level 70, which question corresponds to a level 80, which question corresponds to a level of 85, and so on. And they would have done this through rigorous testing. They would have had a sample set of population with some aptitude level, and they would keep on administering questions to them, and based on their responses, the level of difficulty of the question will be ascertained before the test happens. So there is no ambiguity in terms of whether the 75 or the question that is graded at being at 75 level is more difficult from the one at 70, right? There should be no confusion about this, purely because there is going to be significant statistical thought that would have gone beyond making a question level 75 or judging that a question is level 75 compared to a question that is judged to be at level 70, right? So that is basically what happens. LOD is set before the test. And that is why a lot of people might find this to be fairer, because the system adapts to their ability, and the system sort of goes up and down and tells you that this is exactly the level that you are at when it comes to a particular section, when it comes to a particular section, yes. And in terms of the fairness, in terms of the level of difficulty, it is not dependent on the other people who are taking the test. It is completely dependent on your performance when it comes to getting the score that you might get at the end of that particular test. Now, in terms of negative marking, there isn't any negative marking as such. There are a couple of things that you need to be mindful of nonetheless. One, you have to complete the section, because if you do not complete the section, then there might be a very good chance that the system says that I don't really have enough data to come up with an answer, and because of that it will penalize you, right? So that might be a possibility. So that's why, although there is no negative marking, you have to ensure that you finish the section. The second thing that you have to ensure is that you don't get a lot of incorrect answers right at the beginning or somewhere in the middle. Purely because if you get a lot of answers incorrect at the beginning, you might be graded at say 10 or 20, let's say, for example. And from there, reaching an 80 or 90 might be very difficult. That's why ensure that you're answering at least the first few questions correctly with a lot of thought in your mind. Of course, you can get some of them wrong, but make sure that you are putting in a lot of effort at the beginning of the test, so that once the system knows which range to put you in, then it keeps on throwing questions at you which are of a significant level to you, right? So that is basically what you have to ensure. Now, in terms of the scoring, you are not going to get a score of 250 on 300 or 175 on 200. Those kind of things you are not going to get. You are going to get scores in the form of bands. So let's say, for example, at the NMAT, your score can range from 12 to 120. So it's not a function of how many answers you have got right. It's a function of where the system feels you lie in that entire range of 12 to 120. So that's what, so your score will be in the form of bands instead of raw marks or scaled scores. Now, there is a compulsion to attempt all questions, because if you don't do that, the system will not be able to judge you fairly, and the system will think that you have tried to game the system, and that's why it will penalize you for your effort. So make sure that you are attempting all the questions if it comes to a computer adaptive test. And in terms of the performance, it will be completely dependent on your competence. There will be a healthy mix of questions that will be present. In fact, if you look at specifically the NMAT, the question types will be made known earlier to you through their official guide. So you just have to refer to their official guide and see what all question types are bound to appear at the NMAT, and typically they will not go beyond those question types, right? So you might not really get a question type which is randomly present there and is not a part of the official guide. So make sure that you know which question types are that you want to focus on and prepare for those question types accordingly. So there will be very few surprises in terms of question types when it comes to computer adaptive tests, and in most cases your performance will be synonymous to your ability, right? So in terms of fairness, the computer adaptive test is also pretty fair because it completely depends on your response to generate fresh questions. And that's basically what makes a computer adaptive test different from a computer-based test. If you look at it, both the tests have their own strengths, both the tests have their own weaknesses, both the tests are fair in a way, unfair in a way. It doesn't matter what kind of test you're appearing for, as long as you do your best on that particular day, and that should help you clear any kind of test that exists. So these were the features of the CBT and the CAT, computer-based tests, and the computer adaptive tests that you might come across in your entire test-taking season.